Will campus be crazy forever? Aiden Buzzetti joins us. I'm James Poulos. Welcome to Zero Hour. Aiden Buzzetti's here. He's the president of the 1776 Project Foundation, formerly the head of the coalitions and candidate recruitment project for the 1776 Project PAC. Welcome, Aiden.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so you are in the trenches right now. Obviously, a lot of convos around education, all the way from pre-K or maybe even like inside the womb activity, all the way up to college and well beyond now, with people just sort of lingering, graduate school, masters. It's consuming all of our lives, and in some ways, you should always be learning, as they say. But in other ways, it's becoming like a vehicle for a totalitarian conquest of even the most intimate details of everyday life. What can parents do? What can students do right now to avoid getting sort of caught in that sausage grinder for the rest of their lives?
That's a good question. I think the number one advice that I've given to parents, especially when I was doing more of the PAC work, was number one, get involved in the community and actually be present in your students and your kids' education. The number one driver for school board elections, school board candidates, especially over the course of the pandemic, was these parents actually saw what their teachers were telling their students live over Zoom. That trend has continued, and the more active you are as a parent observing what your kids are learning, the more likely you are to find something that's wrong. On the kids' side, it's difficult, especially when you're in elementary school or middle school, because the teachers are the authority in the classroom. And that's why we have to rely on the school boards to put in the appropriate measures to hold these teachers accountable. It's important to realize that not every teacher is bad, but the ones that are bad disregard all of the rules. They want to make children their ideological slaves, right? And this trend cannot continue, right? It goes from K-12 all the way up through college, past college, and then the students who end up becoming educators themselves have spent their whole lives indoctrinated by progressive critical theory. And then the whole process, the whole cycle starts all over again.
And yet, nevertheless, it is continuing. It seems like they've built a perpetual motion machine. And I think, as my experience as a father and just kind of seeing how things have unfolded, also spent maybe a few too many years in the education system, maybe not, depending on who you ask. But I'm here now, so couldn't have been that bad. I think there's just a lot of parents who don't want the confrontation. And it's not, it's not just because they're afraid of offending someone. It's because what happens? Well, like, you become that parent, and then when you set foot on campus, like, people know that you're like that parent. And it's not just having the arguments. It's not just trying to hold people to account. It's that you become enmeshed in this conflict with this Borg, where all of these sort of layers of administration, and it's not just school boards. It's it's the sort of principal's office, all the assistant tier people, and then it's like sometimes it's like city councils, all their allies, and like the local NGOs, and suddenly you're fighting an entire army. And unless you feel like you're going to bat for your kid with an army of your own, it can seem pretty intimidating. What do you do about that?
Number one step is create your own parent group. That's probably the only precursor you need. Every single election that we have participated in on the electoral side that was successful started with a group of parents who laid the groundwork to find school board candidates, to find the right administrators in the first place. If you don't have a solid group of parents who are willing to collectively shoulder the burden, right, to collectively be those parents, nobody else is going to speak up. But you have to start changing the environment in which these parents interact with the schools. Right now, especially here in Texas, where we've done a fair amount of elections, the school boards were dominated by progressive parent groups, the ones that always talk about being for the teachers and for the kids, but look to the side or look away when they find certain policies like allowing kids and or girls in boys' bathrooms, allowing pronouns in schools, and not letting the parents know what's happening with their children. They all look to the side. So if you have a group of parents who are willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with you and make the case that something needs to change, you're actually laying the groundwork for something substantive, something that people, you and others, can grasp on and ride to something that kids can be proud of. The number one aspect of community organization is finding that group. Mm-hmm. The second is finding that the support networks outside of it. So you have your parents. You have, maybe there's only 5 of you, 5 parents. You can make a case. You can go to your school board meeting. You can review the policies. Then you can go to the state group, so state Republican Party if you're a conservative, the library associations, and anything of that nature is important to build that groundwork.
Well, look, I can go back to, this is really ancient times, but it's still, I guess, applicable, kind of the classic analysis of what the options are for people in some kind of basically democratic government. You've got voice, loyalty, and exit. Yep. And loyalty, you're like, okay, well, I know it's not that great, but I trust my kid, and I sort of, tell them the truth at home and send them in there and just go in, get it done, get out, and you'll be fine. Voice, we just talked about, you're sort of the meme of the guy standing up, Norman Rockwell painting the one guy standing up, I'm saying it, and everyone sort of gasps. But then you got exit. And for a lot of parents, trying to weigh these decisions, especially if you're in, a state like California, to take for me a not so random example, you look at the situation and you're like, okay, I could start the group, I could do the thing, I could be the hero, I could go in there, I could pull out my broadsword, start swinging around. They can't take us all down, or I can make the call, get the U-Haul, put everyone inside, go to the greener pastures, and just spare my child the insanity of it, and spare myself the insanity of it. Mm-hmm. Think about the hours that you could say, you could make maybe bump up to city council instead of having to run for school board. It's kind of like if everyone moves to the woods, no one's living in the woods. But by the same token, it is the potential of just simply pulling up stakes and going somewhere else. Very strong, very promising. The downside, of course, is you're not just leaving the school to collapse of its own insanity. That insanity is probably going to grow. How do you assess that, and how do you counsel people who are trying to figure out between those two choices?
Yeah, I think there are 2 interesting statistics that I can start off. The first is 80% of students in America go to public school. 80%. Still. That number is, as of 2021 and 22, so it's definitely dropped a little bit. Mm-hmm. But, the vast majority of kids in America are going to go to public school. They're always going to go to public school. That's not going to change anytime soon. But, and I think you'll find this interesting, there has been an explosion in the alternative options, especially with the school choice movement doing what it's doing. There's more opportunities for parents to go to private schools or charter schools and religious schools. Even one of the classical Christian associations had their membership triple over the course of the pandemic. So that means parents are taking their kids out of a public school and seeing what their options are. Where can they send their students or send their children to get a quality education and not kind of be inundated with just the insanity that's been happening all across the country. I think it's important that we stand firm on public schools, that we don't necessarily abandon them. But you're right. Not everybody is gonna tolerate it. It can be a risk. In Seattle, they closed down all of their accelerated schools in the name of equity because too many students were white and Asian. Yeah. And now they're sending all of the students to the neighborhood schools, which spend 3 times as much per pupil and have lower scores on average.
Right.
So is it any surprise when parents bail out of the system? I don't think so.
No, when you're in a city on the America's Pacific coast and you're complaining about too many Asians, I mean, it's crazy. Here's what freaks me out. That is like this kind of bizarre world flip of the story that we're all told, which was the white people came to the Pacific coast and then they're Asians, they didn't like them and they just wanted them to build their own. And now you're getting it like weirdly for the opposite direction. It used to be the case that if you were into alternative schools, if you were into sort of creating a kind of little co-op or commune where your neighborhood and your friends could hang out and sort of educate your kids at their own pace. Right? You were a hippie, you were a lefty, you were eating the granola, you were driving the Subaru with the Birkenstocks. Like that was the character type. And now things have strangely changed.
Yes.
I look at the way that sort of like crunchy, lefty, Bernie supporting, tree hugging, peace loving, anti-corporate, anti-globalism, anti-surveillance, anti-big government. It used to be like one of the most instantly recognizable character types in America. That character used to be found everywhere, and not just in the Pacific Northwest, although obviously, you look at Portlandia or whatever. I mean, that was the beating heart of sort of alternative education. And now you look at how things have transformed so much. Does this really just come down to who is in charge politically? Like if your enemies are ruling the government with an iron hand, you pretty much have to like find another way of doing things.
I think this is not necessarily just political, but it's an over-reliance on academia. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably the root of the issue here. There's been huge debates over education for decades now about the way we teach kids to read, the way we teach math, the things to focus on while these kids are going up K through 12 and beyond. And what we found is that none of it's working. I mean, kids do not know how to read now. They haven't known how to read probably for decades, but at least since the early 2000s and 1990s. We are bringing in a huge class of students who are supposed to be adults, who are supposed to vote, who are supposed to engage in our society, that cannot engage with anything above a third or fourth grade reading level. And I think now parents are realizing, especially conservative parents and Christian parents are realizing, my child is not getting what they need. Because what do we value? Yeah, we value academic performance. We value the ability to go get a job and participate in society, but we also value character and virtues. And they don't teach any of that in schools, which is why a lot of the shift towards homeschooling and private schooling is focused on Christian values. It's also focused on classical learning, the Western canon, reading the ancient Greeks, reading the Romans. They don't really do that in public schools anymore. The curriculum is a lot more contemporary. But when you bring in the fact that everybody's test scores are dropping, their reading and math proficiency is at their record lows, they're not becoming good people, and they're not participating in society as a generational average, what's the benefit? And that's why so many people are withdrawing.
It's funny, of course, because if you ask them, they're saying, well, no, this is the only thing that we do. We're not teaching them how to read. Math is racist. We're teaching them to be good people, good members of society. Social, emotional learning, like that's really all that we're doing here is forming them spiritually. And sure enough, it's working. The system is working as designed. They are turning out people with these kinds of attitudes, and they are shaping the way that they think at the ground level what reality is, what a person is, what love is, basic stuff. And so partly it seems obvious that this is coming from an ideological direction, and it's understandable that there are a lot of folks out there who are like, I say it's Marxism, and I say to hell with it. I understand that. But what's also going on is we now live in a technologized society, and we live in a world where the easiest thing to imagine based on the current state of affairs is people becoming less and less important to the workings of the kind of socioeconomic infrastructure. Even something like reading. If everyone's just going to be doing this all day for the rest of their lives, a chimp can you don't need to read in the way that you used to. And that might be terrible, or it might be, I don't know, let millions of people massacred each other when they were all very literate. So who knows? Technology puts us in this position now where we're asking these deep fundamental questions about what is the point? What should we even be doing right now? What is a valuable way to spend our time? What is going to strengthen us? What is going to form our character at a time when everything just seems to be getting wiped away by technology?
The interesting part about that is there's kind of a really big split. You have the classical learning proponents are pretty much anti-tech in the classroom, barring typing skills and basic things like that. And then a lot of the ed tech advocates are huge on technology. They think technology will revolutionize the way that we learn or the way that we interact with texts and engage with students on like an individual level. So you don't leave people behind necessarily, but each student has their own pace of learning. We're still kind of gathering, the evidence on that. There's a little bit of evidence that says if you use too much technology in the classroom, it actually distracts everybody. If some kid is scrolling on his phone during a test or playing a video game on his computer while you're supposed to be learning, then everyone's going to be distracted. But we're trying to figure out.
This is what the adults do all day.
It's what the adults do all day. But we got to find a way to engage with technology in a way that's not overindulgent. I mean, I'll admit, I have a problem with my phone. The way they design these apps are inherently addictive. So that's a big problem, and it's not only going to be solved on an educational level. I mean, that's a really big policy question. Even Ted Cruz has been trying to implement legislation that forces schools to make certain changes to their technology policies so kids aren't getting addicted to it in the classroom. I think tech can be useful as an extra tool, an extra way to learn, a new way to engage with text. But I mean, handwriting and reading something with a tactile manner is probably one of the most efficient ways for us to learn. I mean, we've been doing it for thousands of years at this point. But still, I mean, the question remains, how much is technology corroding us? How much is it actually boosting us? To what extent is it too much? We're still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, we certainly are. And it's been interesting, just going back to reading Alexis de Tocqueville, for instance, and he's talking about the Americans educating their children with the Greeks and the Romans. And even then, it's the 1800s, there was a strong case to be made that this was good for you and this was good for a citizen to know these things and to have those languages, Latin and Greek. But it was this kind of bank shot. It was you're not really going to encounter any Greeks or Romans in real life, but there's a way in which this kind of skill has, it allows you to better approach in an indirect way the challenges of contemporary life. And I got to say, I started making handwritten notes in my planners and everything now that I have too many planners, just to back out of the phone a little bit. Not because the phone's evil or because it's distracting. I mean, look, the promise of the phone is have the world at your fingertips. And well, guess what? The world is incredibly distracting, incredibly addicting, fills you with crazy desires, unfulfillable wants. It's all concentrated in there. So you can blame the tech, but the blame only goes so far. Ultimately, it's sitting with you. And so I sort of, the more that I'm writing, the more I can read what I'm writing. It's becoming legible again, which is very exciting. But it is kind of the indirect benefit of it reminds you of the fact that as a person created with hands and eyes and everything, there's a lot that you can do that is, in a limited but important degree, self-sufficient. And for young people to understand that they have certain faculties and abilities and they can become competent at using them in a fluent way, that grounds you in a world where these questions about technology are okay, look, at the end of the day, I don't know. I'm not gonna know. I don't, I was touring a Great Hearts Academy school a little while ago and talked to the administration there. And they're we really don't do any tech in the classroom. And for me, it was kids right now get plenty of it at home most of the time. I'm not worried that, tomorrow's leaders are going to be like, oh, my parents, they made me write things down and read Dostoevsky, so I don't know what to do about AI. Like that, I just don't know. I'm not worried about that. They are digitally native. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah. And it is interesting to see that there's, when you're looking for those alternative education approaches, there is one flavor that's relatively more tech heavy, that's relatively more STEMmy, and even relatively more remote. And then there's another one that's much more incarnate and tactile and in person. I mean, I'm sure you have a favorite.
I'm a little bit of a stickler. I think I've been moved towards the more tactile side, only because I think a lot of our computer geniuses. I mean, Steve Jobs, all that. The computer then was, it was a little bit before my time. I'm on the younger side, but from what I understand, the computer was a little bit more remote. I mean, you had to go to the library, or maybe if you had one in your house, it was rare, it was hard to use. I mean, the operating systems, you actually had to know how to code. Now it's really easy. There
are these rooms called computer rooms, and that's where the
crazy.
Computers are. Yeah.
I think I grew up on the tail end of that, so I'm not quite. I'm not Gen Alpha. I didn't grow up scrolling on an iPad, which I think is pretty bad. But I wasn't tech illiterate either, although some of that other stuff still can't comprehend it. But I was never able to code. I mean, I never had an interest in computers in the way that Steve Jobs did or Bill Gates did. I mean, I assume most people did, and that's why we don't have a million computer geniuses running around. But I mean, there's just a level at which you engage with that technology that required effort from your brain. Now it takes no effort. So you're right, when all of these kids are inundated with the technology at home, every parent has a phone, they probably have a TV, there's at least one, maybe two computers in the house. I don't think they need technology in the classroom. I don't think they need it at their fingertips at all times. They can have a computer room, right, where they can go and practice and look things up. But I think that there's some level of comfort in actually being separated from the online world. I mean, it sucks you in. I'll admit, my classes when I had an electronic device, I would play, video games. I mean, I wouldn't really pay attention. I don't remember anything from those classes.
Keep it on mute, baby.
Yep, on mute. And the teachers never found out, and it was really easy to hide it from them. I didn't really learn that way. And so I think if I had to go back, even though it might be a little more annoying to younger me at the time, I think I would have really engaged more with writing, with being more tactile, with maybe not necessarily using a chalkboard, but looking something that I know is right in front of me. I can feel it. I can run my fingers over it. That's a lot more engaging for me personally. So
if only you'd been sitting there doodling and writing letters to your crush like everyone else, you'd be running the government by now.
Yeah.
Are you tired of living in a blue state or city? Do you want to get away from crime and people hostile to your way of life? Is it even still possible to live in the America of your childhood? I want to tell you about a company called RidgeRunner. RidgeRunner is building new communities in historic America. You no longer have to settle for living in a place where everything you love is being destroyed by those who hate you. With RidgeRunner, you can once again live where the things you love are cherished. RidgeRunner picks pristine land in rural Kentucky with top-notch natural beauty, value, and location. Move to a RidgeRunner community and be surrounded by patriotic, ambitious Americans that have chosen to live in a setting where their children can run free, their doors don't need to be locked, and natural beauty is abundant. If you have that pioneer spirit and are ready to join Appalachia's rising future as you build yours, schedule a call today to learn more about RidgeRunner properties. Whether you work from home, you love to hunt and fish, you finally want to build that homestead you've always dreamed of, or just simply to be in a community where your way of life is prized, RidgeRunner is ready to help you find the ideal property. With small acre lots starting at just $35,000 to large 100-acre holler farms, well priced under $400,000, RidgeRunner has options for anyone seeking a life piloted on the old ways in Kentucky. Visit www.ridgerunnerusa.com today.
It is a weird time to be a parent. And these issues, especially for people whose parents, when they were kids, were very focused on promoting their children's education. So I think a lot of boomer parents, it was like, well, the factory town is crumbling, the race riots are bad, the industrial America seems to be collapsing, is it the gas embargo is getting rid of all the cool-looking cars. It was the 70s, and it was looking pretty grim. And you have some kids, and what do? You take a look at, well, if there's one place in America that isn't falling apart, it's our institutions of higher learning. And if I can just get my kids into the best darn college that they can get into, then I'm going to get them, off the life raft. I'm going to, it's just like the refugees just like handing their babies to the American soldiers. They're just like, just take him. It'll be a better life. Just go. And not a bad idea and a reasonable thought. And when you find yourself in that position, and you're like, okay, I'm probably not going to get out of sort of like deindustrializing American world, but my kid can, and all I got to do is just make sure that they go to school and they learn and they work hard and they move their way up the ladder. And so that was the game plan for like millions, I think, of Americans in the second half of the 20th century. What happens? Well, what happens is you get a lot of overqualified, overeducated millennials who can't get a job that is worth the trouble of their education, and increasingly got an education that left them convinced that the world that they lived in was actually terrible before the financial crisis. The earth is dying and the patriarchy is eating everything, and it's just, this is the worst time to be alive. And it's like, man, okay, so we've seen how that, really a well-intentioned emphasis on education and seeing education as the way, like, well, I don't really have a choice. If I want my kid to be better off than me, they got to do this. It's not be a plumber. It's not be a priest. It's get your master's degree in basket weaving or whatever. That's what it turned out to be. So for children of that generation, this is a weird time because now if you're, in your 30s or your 40s or maybe even your 20s as a parent, and you're looking at the lay of the land, you're going like, okay, so, the academia has fallen just like everything else. Nevertheless, it seems like if my kid isn't raised woke or educated into the woke religion, it's going to be a tougher road for them. The job opportunities aren't going to be there, especially if they're, heaven forbid, a white kid, that it's going to be rough. And then there's this tech thing. If they don't, if I don't send them into STEM, if I don't force them to be an engineer, then what are they going to be doing? They're going to be like shining the shoes of the engineers. They're maybe going to be shining the shoes of the robots of the engineers. Like the dystopian thinking can really carry you away. And so like, how do you help people to understand that it is possible to change expectations about your kid's future? It's not like it was before where it's just moving up the ladder. Upward mobility does not necessarily leave you better off. It's look at private schools in California are worse than the public ones. They will bankrupt you. And Elon Musk has gone through this, sent his kids to Crossroads right there in Beverly Hills. What could go wrong? Well, now, now his kids are switching their sexual identity, and he's sort of like, it's over. So it's really like I think we're in a situation where you have to overhaul your whole concept of what success looks like for your kids. How do you help people understand that it's not reducing their expectations for their kid to take not just an alternative education path, but an alternative understanding of success path?
Yeah, it's interesting, especially when you bring up private schools. Public schools have some measure of accountability, right? They are a government organization. Private schools, doesn't matter. I've talked to moms who send their kids to the most expensive private schools in the country who bring their complaints about DEI or social emotional learning, or talk about white privilege or white adjacent privilege if they're Asian. They talk to the administrators, and the administrators basically tell them, don't make a fuss. If you make a fuss and throw a fit, we will kick your child out. And they're so trapped and the prestige of their, of their communities, of sending their kids to one of the best private schools, or you're being involved in their, more upper class social circles, that it shuts them up. They can't do anything. There's no measure of accountability there. I think those people are slowly starting to realize first that just because you send your kid to a super expensive private school does not mean they're going to get a good education. And it doesn't mean that they're going to immediately be better off, especially when you have the administrators bullying you for being concerned about the education of your children.
And that's setting aside price. I mean, what is it now? 90,000 sort of minimum to get into that upper echelon of the friggin' U.S. News and World Report. I can't believe that thing still exists, but people still pay attention to it.
There are people spending 2 times the average, the median salary for an American on their kids' education, and they're getting shut down. And then those kids, they try to get into the Ivy League schools, but then the Ivy League schools are dumbing down their standards because kids can't perform well on standardized tests anymore. The same, I think, is true. It's a growing consciousness for middle-class families and even poorer families. It's the poor families, I think, or the lower-class families get a little bit better off because they have better access to scholarships, right? And if they manage to make it through the public education system, most likely unscathed, then they have good opportunities to go to community colleges and have better paths that won't necessarily send them into debt. They're also more likely, probably, to be plumbers and electricians, people that are useful for society and won't get displaced by robots and AI. It's hard to get that message across. I remember arguments with my own grandparents. They tell me, "Oh, you want to get a job? Walk in with your resume and ask to speak to the manager." It doesn't work that way anymore, Grandpa. I really appreciate the advice, but it's a totally different world. And I think the message that I've been able to get across that kind of works is I went to one of the most liberal universities in the country, American University in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. I got basically a useless degree, political science. I mean, who even uses that? It's totally worthless. I went there mostly for the location, and I found on my campus the most radical hotbed of activism, probably, even compared to other DC schools.
Yeah,
and it was
very spicy.
It was absolutely mind-blowing to me. And then when I go and I look at the statistics and I see, okay, where are my peers from that class getting jobs? And it's nonprofits, or they're professional activists, or they immediately go into political campaigns. Those aren't real jobs. There's no actual tangible skills that you're picking up. And even though I don't necessarily agree with the assertion that education is only about skills, I show that to my parents, my grandparents, my extended family, and I say, look at what I've done, and I'm only able to do what I do because of luck, because I managed to get to know people, because I performed okay. But this person are professional activists. This person works at a nonprofit funded by George Soros, and I know them personally, and all they do is complain all day online.
Yeah, their skill is messing with people's minds.
Exactly. And so I go talk to my cousins, and I say, okay, well, what are you doing? Oh, I want to give back to my community. I've gotten involved in my church, and I've been my uncle. Amazing. He's a contractor. He will go, and if he knows you and he's friends with you, he will go and help you with your house for free. I mean, these are the types of skills that you can actually give back to your family, your friends with, and make a pretty good living.
With the elections coming up, I'm expecting things to get even crazier than they already are, especially when it comes to freedom of speech and how hypocritical the left is when it comes to it. To them, it's okay to chant from the river to the sea, but you calling our border crisis an invasion is a crime. We already know that big tech is doing everything in their power to suppress the truth. They even collude with our government to do so. Need I remind you about Hunter Biden's laptop? You better believe that getting the truth out to you will be even harder than it is now. You see, here at Blaze Media, we saw it all coming, and it's exactly why we exist. Blaze TV and Blaze News is a place where I can speak freely with no repercussions, a place where viewers can be a part of the solution and ensure that they can't cut us off from each other. Consider supporting Blaze Media, where our mission is to set fire to the lies the left wants you to believe. Not only will you get this show, but you'll have access to everything else we do here, from our Blaze original series to Steve Baker's incredible investigative work, revealing the shocking lies about January 6th. All that and so much more. Go to blazetv.com, subscribe today, and when you do, be sure to use promo code ZEROHour to get $20 off your subscription. That's blazetv.com and use the promo code ZEROHour to get $20 off. Do it today.
Yeah, and I don't think you have to be like an apocalyptic sort of panic person in order to, it is hard to forecast things, and there's a certain like insanity to trying to forecast things, even when you think that it's easy to do so, maybe especially when you think it's easy to do so. But nevertheless, it's almost like, we have kind of reached this apex moment of we're going to turn everyone into a knowledge worker. We're going to turn everyone into a sort of like emotional laborer. It's all going to take place in this kind of disembodied national environment, which is why, God bless him, when Elon Musk starts talking about the light of collective consciousness, and I'm like, whoa, no, like we already saw that movie. We know how it ends. It's everyone becomes schizophrenic and starts killing each other. My point is, it's becoming commonsensical to look at the world that we live in and say, probably we're at peak like knowledge work, and this economy of, I don't really know how to do anything but mess with people's minds. Don't really know how to do anything but manipulate symbols. I review abstracts of academic journal, like whatever that is. It's BS jobs or whatever you want to call them. It just seems like we kind of maxed that out. And so if we did max that out, it's pretty easy, relatively speaking, for a parent or a student to say, I'm going to not do that. So whether it's you sort of going in the time machine or someone who's like, now college age, similar fact pattern to yours, they might not go for that political science degree anymore. But it's really hard for an institution to make a kind of serious change away from that. And so many of our universities, not just at the top, are so hardwired, so locked in to that kind of like, it's going to be sociology degrees, and it's going to be, blankety blank studies degrees, and it's going to be, it's all this kind of like getting away from that. How do you get away from that? That is your bread and butter. That is where your tuition is coming from. That is where your Borg members are coming from. Asking a university to get away from that is asking them to like saw off a limb at best. But what's the alternative?
So I think there's one big alternative, and it is expanding the opportunity, right? There are a lot of high schools, or a lot of schools in general, that have one purpose. There are high schools that specifically train people that want to be police officers, firefighters, EMS. There are high schools that really focus on agriculture. There are, a bunch of magnet schools or magnet programs that have one focus area where they do general education, but they really grill the students on one thing as they go through that program. That's a really interesting idea. And then, of course, you have the shop classes, right? My high school had a bunch of different tracks. They had a computer science track. They had an engineering track where you could use a 3D printer, and they had a shop class. Developing those skills while people are learning and creating their foundation, their academic foundation, that is a good way to see what students like, what they don't like, and kind of push people in the right direction. But I think we also need to change the way our workforce thinks about education. It used to be the universities or the colleges would compete with apprenticeships, right? Even if you were a lawyer, there are only 2 states, I believe, in the United States that allow you to apprentice to a lawyer and then take the bar and become a lawyer. So
it's like the Kim Kardashian route, right?
Yeah, no, it's the college system, the university system, the way we have it now, the way it's developed over the last 100, 200 years, has choked the life out of any alternative. And so what we need to do is start bringing back those alternatives. It doesn't matter if your local school board puts more money into a shop class, or you have a dual enrollment for high schoolers to start working on a specific degree early. Anything to break the monopoly of higher education on career pathways is a good thing. It doesn't matter really how it happens, and I've always argued this, the way that the modern world works is, it's very complex, but it's also very streamlined. 100 years ago or 150 years ago, you could do whatever you wanted, really, as long as you had the backing of somebody or somebody willing to take you on as an apprentice and train you. You can move across the country and start in a completely new field as long as somebody was willing to invest the time and effort into you. The universities now just want to pump out degrees, right? New board members and all of that. But if we can split that up, if we can break that monopoly over the career pathways that employers expect, then I think we're going to see a real change in people's attitudes towards education, especially on the employer side where it really matters, because the argument is, oh, you can't get a job if you don't have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. But if we can start changing that perspective little by little, we're going to be in a better place.
Do you think if that works, or maybe even if it doesn't work for a while, do you think that universities, as we know them, are more likely right now to change as a result of these forces or die?
I believe universities should probably die in their current form. I think they will. I don't think that they can adapt to the change quick enough. I think that we have an increasingly large amount of elected officials who are willing to take a sword and kind of hold it at their throat and say change or die, or join or die, but it's just so stagnant. All of the COVID funds, all of the federal funds going to these universities have just blown up the administrative staff. That's not something that you can change. So either way, whether they change or whether they die off completely, it's going to kill higher education as we know it, and hopefully, out of the ashes, something new arises.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. It's kind of hard for me to root for the death of anyone or anything, but certainly it would be well earned at this point. But if they do survive, and I think they're trying to do this now, here's how I think they would do it. You go back to the beginning, and the universities were theological institutions. Mm-hmm. Theology was the queen of the sciences. And the primary purpose of the university, it was to give people knowledge, but it was really to give them a proper spiritual formation, mm-hmm. a proper understanding mm-hmm. of how and why the cosmos was ordered the way it was. And you come to the present day and you start to go, oh, I get it. Like, they realize that we hit peak knowledge work. They realize that these social degrees and these blankety-blank studies degrees are worthless. And so they're just going to return to their roots. Yep. And they're going to become, some people are like, they're woke madrasas now. And that seems to be increasingly true. But instead of real madrasas, they're just kind of returning to their theological roots, and they're saying mm-hmm. like, okay, there's a new criterion to determine your rank in society, and it's mm-hmm. going to be a theological one, except with this new religion that we've sort of created for ourselves. If you go back to like the mid 2000s, everyone was worried that it was going to be like an evangelical theocracy in America. Kevin Phillips wrote this book, American Theocracy, and there was some evidence that it was like people is how soon we forget, like the 80s, the 90s, there were evangelicals everywhere, man, and they were like really productive, and they had big families, very prominent. A lot of them, it was looking like there was a real movement that was really going to just kind of like take mm-hmm. hold in government. Didn't happen. Many reasons for that. Maybe one of those reasons was people were too afraid that was what the theocracy was going to be, and now we have this other theocracy. So what I'm looking for universities to respond to this mm-hmm. by trying to figure out how to create a sort of coalition of students who have given up on prosperity, given up on being wealthy, just a very renunciatory couple of generations. students who think that you should leave your COVID mask on as a form of humility, students who are supporting Hamas because, when they look at their classmate in a hijab or a niqab or whatever, they're like, yes, this is authenticity. This is like spiritual renunciation. Let's face it, like the past 25 years have been really bad for America. In the sense of setting people up for incredibly high expectations and then one by one just like destroy, worse than you could have possibly expected. It has been tough. I've seen it happen to millennials, and it's kind of happening. The Zoomers a little bit different because they can at least scroll on their phones. But there are like millions and millions of young people who aren't so young anymore, just crushed, just had their expectations totally crushed by a government that is now saying, we may have let you down in every single way, but you know what? We love you for who you are. We celebrate you, no matter how crazy you are, no matter how ugly, no matter how confused, no matter how resentful. We love you and we celebrate your identity. That's powerful. And that just might be this kind of crazy panic button that the universities are going to be able to hit to make the jump into this new world.
Yeah, and I think, the government, I think a lot of these disaffected millennials and older have latched on to, or at least the progressive ones have latched on to a lot of the equity and inclusion language as a way to fulfill themselves, right? Especially, they don't have kids, right? The economic situation hasn't been great for them either. So in all areas of life, when your life is not fulfilled, whether it's spiritually, you don't have a family, you don't really own anything, you don't have good economic opportunity, how do you fill that up? They take this ideology and they push it back down. They think, oh, I'm going to make these kids better. I'm going to share this with them. That's what universities are doing now. I think you're right. The university used to be a measure of worth, but of real education. It was a sign that somebody was, yes, educated, but also worldly and spiritually fulfilled. They understood where they came from in a way. I think we will go back to that. I think universities now have lost track, but this is the reason why classical education has had such a boom. Even on the K-12 side, students who have Duke University did a poll, and they found that students who went through the classical Christian schools had higher levels of self-worth. They were more engaged in their texts. They felt better about themselves. They interacted with other students better. So you're right, there is something missing in our education system, whether it's K-12, whether it's university-based, but we've lost something in our education system from 200, 150 years ago to now that has completely killed engagement for generations of people. But we can bring it back.
I think we can bring it back, and I think one of the more unexpected things that I think could actually shake out is, look, if there is this kind of educational renaissance, and maybe you become a lifelong lover of Cicero, maybe you don't, maybe you just become the plumber who likes to quote the Aeneid or whatever. It happens, and it used to happen a lot more. You used to have like classically educated Americans going out there just like getting some jobs and working some jobs and having a stable, orderly life and enjoying themselves, but not too much. And like that was, there used to be a lot of that. If that happens, then we're going to start reanimating some of these areas of socioeconomic life where, I'm sorry, but I don't want a bot doing this for me. It's just better when we do it as human beings together. Mm-hmm. And that creates economic opportunity and it creates jobs. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm like a woke Zoomer who is sitting through these classes going like, I guess I agree with all this stuff, but like, I just feel like I'm just like getting moldy, just like sitting here, what's the future going to be? Like a lot of people enjoy their college years and then they get out and they're like, well, now what am I supposed to do? And I think that might happen to a lot of Wokies because the jobs just aren't there. What are you supposed to do? Tell a computer how to make people say the right words? Like it's not, there's something that falls so far short of what we know is true about our humanity. Mm-hmm. these folks might be looking for jobs, and might say like, you know what, yeah, I'm just like moving to the red state and I'm working for the plumber company because at least I can like use my hands for something other than like hitting the delete button on like the Facebook posts or whatever. I think it could happen, but I think, you know, I just want to close with this. Parents are bugging. The inflation is happening. The cost of food, everything's going up. Do you have like a quick parting take for people who are like, what can I afford? What is worth the money right now, education-wise?
My quick take would be, if you can send your child anywhere for free or for minimum amount, I would do it. It doesn't matter if it's plumbing school, it doesn't matter if you're sending your child to be an electrician, if they're going to a community college. There is so much opportunity to get your child an education. You don't have to send them to a super woke private Ivy League university. You can send them to state schools. States have really good scholarships. But you need to make sure that your kid knows what they're going to do with their life, or at least has some kind of driving mechanism that makes them succeed. Most people don't possess that. They can't read, they can't write, they can't do math. They don't know what they're going to contribute to society. So if you're there for your kid and they make a decision and you're able to support them in that, they will, be leagues ahead of anybody else in their generation. So that would be my...
I think that's a pretty good take. There's always one more question. Geographically, what do you think is going to be the hot spot just for the whole sort of like community resurgence, alternative education? Is there like a hot part of the country?
Florida.
Yeah.
Florida's, the public schools there are starting to experiment with classical education.
Wow.
DeSantis and the school board members there are inventive. They're ready to push the boundaries to bring back what we've lost in the education system. So I'll keep my eyes on Florida.
News you can use. Aiden Buzzetti, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that's all the time we got, at least till next time around. So if you want to become a BlazeTV subscriber, which you should, you can help us create more content just like this. Go to blazetv.com. Use the code 0hour20 for $20 off your first year of BlazeTV. This is 0 Hour. I'm James Poulos, and may God have mercy on us all.